For the last 100 years, the smartest minds on Madison Avenue have been trying to sell you things based on, well, a scientific lie.
Yeah, a pretty big one. They basically thought you had the brain of a drooling dog.
Right. And if you've ever looked at an advertisement and felt this deep sense of annoyance or like a brand was talking down to you, that fundamental misunderstanding is the reason why.
It sounds incredibly cynical, but looking at the historical data, it was the working premise for generations of advertisers. They built an entire empire on this assumption that human beings can be conditioned to consume.
Exactly like training a pet to perform a trick.
Precisely.
But the problem for those advertisers and the core of our deep dive today is that the modern consumer isn't a dog at all. You, the listener, are a cat.
Which changes everything.
It really does. We're looking at source material today from the book Waiting for Your Cat to Bark by Bryan and Jeffrey Eisenberg. And our mission here is to figure out why traditional marketing is failing so spectacularly right now.
And how the balance of power shifted completely from the corporation over to the consumer.
Right, and what it actually takes for a business to survive in what they call an experience economy.
So the central thesis we have to establish first is that the era of mass marketing is dead. Where a business could just pull a lever and dictate public demand. That's gone.
Completely gone.
Customers have all the leverage now. We've moved entirely to a what's in it for me or a WIFM mindset.
Yeah.
And recognizing that fierce feline independence is really the only way organizations are going to thrive moving forward.
Okay, so to really grasp why modern marketing is flailing,
Yeah.
you need to look at that spectacularly flawed scientific premise it was built on. We have to rewind to 1904 to Ivan Pavlov.
Ah, yes. The famous dogs.
Right. Most people know the broad strokes, The Russian scientist wins a Nobel Prize, he works with dogs, and he notices they start salivating just at the sight of the lab assistant who feeds them.
Yeah, because the assistant's lab coat basically became an environmental trigger. Pavlov realizes he can manipulate this, so he introduces the sound of a bell.
Rings the bell, provides the wheat.
Exactly. Rings the bell, provides the meat. He does this until the dog's neurological pathways associate the bell with the food so intrinsically that he can ring the bell, withhold the food, and the dog still physically drools.
Which is classical conditioning in its purest form.
Right. But the leap from a Russian laboratory to the billboards you drive past every day that happens in the 1920s, an American behaviorist named John Broadus Watson takes this concept and brings it straight to Madison Avenue.
And Watson's background is critical here. He was the guy behind the highly controversial Little Albert experiment, right?
Yes, where he essentially conditioned an 11-month-old baby to be terrified of white, fluffy objects.
I mean, it's just dark stuff.
Very dark. But he takes that knowledge of psychological manipulation, becomes a vice president at the J. Walter Thompson Advertising Agency, and turns it on the American public.
Wow.
He applies this behaviorist approach to products like Maxwell House Coffee and Odorono, which was an early deodorant. The Odorono campaign is a perfect example of this. Well, Watson didn't try to sell the chemical composition of the deodorant. He used the advertising space to ring a bell of social anxiety. Specifically, he targeted women with the fear of being gossiped about for body odor.
So he associated the primal fear of social rejection with the product.
Exactly, and it worked. He demonstrated that human preferences for rival products weren't based on objective sensory qualities. They were based entirely on engineered associations.
And suddenly the marketing industry believed they had discovered the master key to human commerce. The formula was simple, right? If you ring the media bell loud enough, you can condition the public to drool for whatever you're selling.
That was the idea, yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. The fundamental flaw in that theory is that humans aren't dogs. It's like trying to teach a cat to fetch. A dog is deeply social. It wants to please the pack leader. A dog brings the tennis ball back because he wants you to be happy.
Right, it supports the social order. But a cat, on the other hand, is solitary. They're largely indifferent, entirely self-indulgent. A cat might chase a toy once, but only because she finds it briefly amusing on her own terms.
Exactly. So marketers have essentially been throwing tennis balls at cats for 50 years, standing there confused as to why the cats are just staring back at them.
It's a great visual.
The authors actually include this fantastic little cat haiku that perfectly captures the modern consumer's mindset. It goes, "Am I in your way? You seem to have it backwards. This pillow's taken."
That's perfect. But what's fascinating here is that the dog theory actually looked like it was working for decades.
Because of the limited media.
Exactly. It was an environmental illusion. When
Hmm.
Watson was doing this in the 1920s and really throughout the mid-20th century, media options were severely constrained. You had a few radio stations, a handful of magazines, and eventually 3 major TV networks.
Consumers had zero alternatives.
Right. Businesses had a captive audience, so the conditioning appeared highly effective. But the moment technology expanded our choices and fragmented the media landscape, the illusion shattered. The true, independent, feline nature of the consumer just took over.
Which raises a huge question about the mechanics of those old campaigns. When marketers were treating us like a captive audience, what specific bells were they choosing to ring? I mean, they couldn't just keep playing on the fear of body odor forever.
No, of course not. As the market filled up with competitors, those bells had to target much deeper, more abstract human needs.
Which brings us to Maslow.
Yes, Abraham Maslow's 1943 hierarchy of needs. We all know the basic structure of the pyramid, right? You start at the bottom with foundational deficit needs like food, water, and shelter.
The survival stuff.
Yeah. Once those are secured, human motivation moves up the pyramid to social belonging, then esteem, and finally arrives at the top with self-actualization. You know, the desire to achieve your ultimate potential.
And marketers use this pyramid as a literal roadmap for escalating their messaging. You can see it perfectly in the evolution of soft drinks. You start with early soda fountains in 1819, then Dr. Pepper in 1885, Coke in 1886.
And in those early days, the marketing was entirely anchored to the bottom of the pyramid, the deficit need. You're thirsty, this liquid quenches thirst. It was purely utilitarian.
But once the market is saturated with dozens of carbonated beverages, that utilitarian bell stops working. Every drink quenches thirst.
Right, so to differentiate themselves, brands had to migrate up Maslow's pyramid. They had to attach their sugar water to complex psychological states. Coca-Cola aimed for the top of the pyramid.
Global authenticity and harmony.
Exactly. They ran the "I'd like to teach the world to sing" campaigns. They branded themselves as the real thing. They weren't selling a beverage anymore, they were selling a self-actualized ideal.
And Pepsi.
Pepsi looked at the pyramid and targeted the middle layer, the need for social belonging. They became the choice of a new generation.
I buy that for lifestyle brands. But what happens when you can't tie a product to a grand human emotion? No one achieves spiritual enlightenment by buying a spreadsheet machine or a server rack.
That's a very fair point.
Right. If we look at early personal computers, the why I am what's in it for me is entirely based on utility. How do you ring a bell for a commodity?
Well, that is the breaking point for traditional marketing. With complex, utilitarian products, IBM found early success by anchoring themselves to concepts of reliability and corporate leadership. They wanted the brand to just mean the computer.
That's a dangerous game.
Very. Because that need couldn't be universally tied to a deep emotional state, it left the brand highly vulnerable to the actual literal experience of the end user. When you can't sell a dream, you have to deliver on the reality.
Which leads directly to a massive power shift in consumer control. We have to talk about Jeff Jarvis, the Dear Mr. Dell incident.
Yes.
A watershed moment for the internet.
Unquestionably, Jeff Jarvis was just a frustrated customer who bought a Dell computer that didn't work properly. He dealt with terrible customer service, and he wrote a blog post detailing his miserable experience.
Titled, Dear Mr. Dell.
Exactly. Just one man, publishing his raw, unvarnished reality online.
But the impact was disproportionate to anything we had seen before.
Because it resonated. It tapped into a latent pool of frustration among other users, creating a deluge of shared negative sentiment. That single post bypassed Dell's entire multi-million-dollar marketing apparatus.
Wild to think about.
It proved that in a connected world, the user's raw experience is infinitely more powerful than the brand's engineered message. The customer themselves had become the medium. Dell's bell simply stopped working because Jarvis exposed that there is no meat behind it.
He proved that consumer now holds the megaphone. But to understand why a giant like Dell couldn't just spend more money to drown him out, we have to look at what marketing was originally designed to do in the first place, which is overcome friction.
Friction is the operative word here. Friction in commerce is any psychological or logistical hurdle that stands between a customer's desire and the actual purchase.
Like geographical distance or a complicated checkout process.
Or even just a fundamental lack of trust in the seller. The entire history of human commerce is essentially a war on friction.
Let's trace the mechanics of that evolution. You start with barter. I have eggs, I need your shoes. But if you don't happen to want eggs today, the transaction fails. It's immediate, but the logistical friction is massive.
So human society invents stored value money. Then we consolidate, we build specialized commercial districts, medieval high streets, and eventually modern shopping malls.
We remove the friction of having to hunt down the shoemaker by putting all the shoes in one easily accessible building.
Right. Then technology steps in to accelerate the process. The postal service and the railway system give rise to the Sears catalog. Suddenly, the geographical friction of living 50 miles from a store is gone.
And then we see the leap to mass communication with radio and television. And there's a vital mechanical distinction to make here between passive and intrusive media.
Yes, passive media requires your active, focused attention. A newspaper, a magazine, a billboard, you have to actively choose to read it.
While intrusive media, radio, and television bypasses that choice, it invades your living room and grabs your attention even when you're eating dinner or doing chores.
And for a brief window in history, this intrusive model was a marketer's dream. You could reach 90% of the American public with a few well-placed TV ads. But then, the mass audience fragmented.
AM radio splits into FM network television, where a single episode of The Cosby Show could casually pull in 65 million viewers, shatters into hundreds of hyper-specialized cable channels. And finally, the internet arrives and atomizes the entire system.
Which changes the nature of friction entirely.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about friction in sales like a pebble in your shoe. In the 1800s, you just had to deal with the pebble if you wanted the shoes. You tolerated the friction because you had no choice.
That's a great analogy.
Right. But today, if there's a pebble, a slow website, a bad review, you just pull out your phone and buy a different pair of shoes from a competitor in a different country while you're still walking down the street. But I have to ask, how fast does this friction-free communication actually impact a business's bottom line in real time?
Well, the feedback loop is almost instantaneous now. The source material highlights the legendary failure of the movie Giggly in 2003 as the perfect case study.
Oh, the Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez vehicle.
That's the one. It had everything traditional marketing could ever ask for. A-list stars dominating the tabloids, massive hype, and a colossal advertising budget. The studio was ringing the bell as loudly as humanly possible.
But the movie itself wasn't great.
It was terrible, and when it premiered on the East Coast, the audience realized it immediately. Because of early cell phones and the internet, those viewers instantly broadcast their negative experiences.
So the word got out.
The reality of the product was communicated so efficiently that by the time the movie was supposed to open on the West Coast 3 hours later, ticket sales had already flatlined.
Wow. 3 hours.
3 hours to completely neutralize tens of millions of dollars in marketing. The bell cannot save you if the meat is rotten.
So the broadcast model is broken, mass media is dead, and your customers will instantly expose any gap between what you promise and what you deliver. What does a modern business actually do to persuade anyone? If you can't shout at everyone at once, how do you sell?
You have to stop trying to speak to the masses and start aggregating niches. Media fragmentation is actually a massive advantage if you know how to use it for micro-marketing.
Because the goal isn't to be everywhere anymore.
Exactly. It's to be exactly where your specific customer is looking. Look at a company like Alienware. They didn't try to compete with IBM or Dell for the general consumer. They targeted an incredibly specific, highly demanding, niche, high-end PC gamers.
And they didn't just target them with ads. They built the architecture to support them. They designed machines with advanced cooling systems, specific aesthetics, and they fostered community forums that actually solved the friction points unique to gamers.
Precisely. They designed the entire ecosystem. Or look at QuickBooks, which entirely focused on the specific accounting friction experienced by small businesses. This is the underlying mechanic of the long tail effect.
Right, the long tail.
The sources bring up a striking metric from Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. He observed that 20% of Amazon's book sales fall completely outside the top 130,000 titles that physical chain superstores are even physically capable of stocking.
Because physical stores have the friction of shelf space. The internet removes that. It allows a business to aggregate global demand for highly obscure niches.
Yes.
If you read a book on, say, left-handed medieval calligraphy, you might only have one potential buyer in your physical zip code. But the internet aggregates the thousands of buyers scattered across the globe, making that niche incredibly profitable.
And serving those niches effectively requires a complete shift in perspective. We're now operating in the experience economy, a concept popularized by management thinkers Pine and Gilmore. A brand is no longer a logo, a clever slogan, or a jingle.
The brand is the experience itself.
The totality of the experience of the exchange itself, yes. There's a quote in the text from a British businessman named George Smith, all the way back in 1917, that was incredibly prescient. He said, "Selling is not a separate division of business. It is business."
That implies that every single department is actually a marketing department.
Absolutely.
I mean, if the ad promises a 2-day delivery, logistics has to flawlessly execute that promise. If the package is 3 days late, the customer's experience dictates that the brand is unreliable.
And no amount of clever copywriting is going to fix that broken trust. Production, finance, customer service, they all have to deliver on the YIFM. The entire operational architecture of the business has to be designed as an engine of persuasion.
So what does this all mean? I get that experience is everything now, but I have to push back on the feasibility of this.
Yeah.
We have to be reasonable, right? I want a 4-course gourmet meal delivered to my door for $1.
Sure, we all do.
That's a great experience for me, but it would bankrupt the business. Amazon spent billions building out warehouse networks to reduce the friction of shipping times. How does a normal business pivot to providing a flawless, customized experience without destroying their profit margins?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's really not about giving away the farm. Thriving in the experience economy isn't about operating at a loss just to make the customer smile.
Okay, then what is it?
It's about extreme transparency. It's about publishing all the necessary information a customer needs to feel confident so they can voluntarily choose to engage on your terms.
So it's about setting the expectation accurately, rather than just lowering the price or artificially speeding up delivery.
Exactly. You're no longer trying to trick a customer into buying something with an intrusive, loud bell. You're building an architecture that makes purchasing the logical, obvious choice for the right customer.
That makes a lot of sense.
If you run a high-end restaurant and your signature meal costs $100, you don't discount it to remove friction. You provide the information. You showcase the sourcing of the rare ingredients, you highlight the chef's pedigree, present impeccable reviews, and offer a seamless reservation process.
You remove the psychological friction of doubt.
Yes, so the customer feels completely confident and happily pays the premium. The experience justifies the margin.
Let's bring this all together for you, the listener. We've covered a massive paradigm shift today. We've traced the history of marketing from the era of Pavlov's dogs, where advertisers believed they could condition a captive audience to drool on command, to a modern landscape run by independent, skeptical cats.
A completely different world.
The old playbook of mass broadcasting and ringing an intrusive bell until the consumer complies is completely obsolete. What works today is aggregating niches, practicing extreme transparency, and engineering frictionless customer experiences. Marketing is no longer what a company says in a commercial. Marketing is every single thing that company does.
And that reality leads to a fascinating implication that extends far beyond corporate strategy, which is the thought I want to leave you with today.
Well, I'd love to hear it.
If the experience economy dictates that a brand is defined entirely by the total sum of interactions, touch points, and information available about it, apply that to your own life.
Your personal brand.
Exactly. Every email you send to a colleague, every comment you leave on social media, the way you handle a meeting or a disagreement, you're constantly leaving a behavioral trail. In this highly connected, frictionless world, how is your own personal brand being experienced by the people around you right now? Are you barking loudly, hoping sheer volume gets you what you want, or are you operating like a cat?
That is a brilliant way to frame it. You can't control the message, only the experience you deliver. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Keep questioning the bells you hear out there, and remember, the pillow is yours if you want it.